episode of the BioHub. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Uwe Schoenbeck, a venture partner at Canaan Partners, an early-stage venture capital firm known for investing in visionary entrepreneurs and transformative ideas. Uwe has an impressive career spanning over 20 years in the pharma and biotech industry. Before joining Canaan, he was the SVP and CSO of Emerging Science and Innovation at Pfizer, where he led groundbreaking initiatives in partnerships, acquisitions, and academic collaborations. Uwe's journey also includes impactful leadership roles at Wyeth and Boehringer Ingelheim, and he has contributed over 100 peer-reviewed publications to the field of molecular biology, cardiovascular research, and immunology. With such an extensive background, Uwe's experience in both science and business makes him an influential figure in shaping the biotech investments and company creation. In this episode, we'll explore Uwe's career path, Canaan's investment strategies, and his thoughts on navigating the complexities of biotech business dynamics. Welcome to the show, Uwe. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks, Max.
Yeah, really well. Really well. It's great to have you on. I'm pretty excited. So I guess just to start us off, let's just talk about your journey from academia to leading roles in pharma and then now on the venture capital side. Can you walk us through what brought you into the pharma world and also just how your path evolved throughout?
We're starting with quite a loaded question right out of the gate here, so that could easily keep us here for more than an hour, but I'll give it a try. So I think in the end, it was really an array of fairly fortunate circumstances that got me where I am today. I mean, growing up in Germany, you had to make a fairly definitive decision on your career direction early on. Basically, when you finish high school at the age of 17 or 18, all I knew at that age was that I didn't really want a desk job. And the only consistent area I enjoyed was science. Partly, for some reason, I was always eager to better understand the diseases family members had, my grandparents, my parents, and so on. So I ended up applying to the local university, didn't really know what I was getting into, and started my studies. Fairly early on, I started looking for more modern edges in science, and I got interested in a field called immunology. And it actually came from a very late evening seminar, a single seminar I listened to. Back then, there was, I think, a total of 3 textbooks in this field and not much there. But I spoke to the presenter. It was an MD who was leading a pretty good-sized research center that was affiliated with several universities. And through that, I actually ended up doing my bachelor and my PhD at that institute rather than the university. And when thinking about, what direction I wanted to take with my work, I followed a fairly simple, but as I know today, an utterly wrong kind of approach. My thinking was that oncology would be solved within the decade. And for neuroscience, it would be way too complicated to ever understand the brain. So I decided to go after cardiovascular disease. Again, partly because a lot of my family members suffered from it, was something I had heard about and read about, and I thought there was a lot of future there. So in finishing up my PhD at this Forschungszentrum Central Borstel in Germany, I had reached out, among others, to Peter Libby, who was chief of cardiology at the Brigham, who happened to be at a conference in Berlin, not far from my hometown. So I decided to drive over and try to talk to him, but fairly quickly ran out of time as he had to go back and catch his flight back to the US. So I ended up driving him to the airport, basically having my interview in the car while driving, but which apparently was enough to help me secure a postdoc spot in his lab, for which I was quite grateful. So I arrived in Boston actually in, I think it was January 1996, just 3 days before the big blizzard actually. Anyhow, different story. And, after a couple of years doing my postdoc at the Brigham, I was fortunate enough to be offered a position actually at the Brigham and Harvard Medical. And so became dead set on an academic career. That was it. The rest of my life I spent in academia, was quite happy. But several years into the time at the Brigham, we had been working on the role of inflammatory mediators like CD4 ligand in cardiovascular disease. And I got in contact with a pharma company called Boehringer Ingelheim, who happened to have, the best trimeric CD40 ligand that we really wanted to use in our studies. They were kind enough to share this with us, and long story made short, we ended up working together quite a few things. We published a few papers together. And at one point, they invited me to come over to their site here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and just present on our work. Sounded fairly innocent, but as it turned out, Boehringer was actually looking to set up a cardiovascular research unit from scratch here in Connecticut. And that obviously was quite a unique opportunity. So I spent quite a few days thinking back and forth what happened to the idea of being dead set on academic career versus this opportunity, quite a big jump. So heavy-heartedly, I decided to skip my plan on a lifelong academic career and join pharma, which I actually never regretted that step. So I did that for 5 years or so, and then started to look to expand my range beyond cardiovascular diseases. Wyeth came along and offered an opportunity to do that by building what was kind of a new function, which was focused on identifying cutting-edge science outside the organization, across therapeutic areas, globally, and bring them in. And that was at a time where we started to see the change in pharma from the not invented here mentality to really try to find the best science, whether it was coming from the insides or from the outside. It was certainly not in my plans that Wyeth then got acquired by Pfizer just a few months later, but that's life. And it turned out to be and to provide an even bigger opportunity for me. So over the years, additional responsibilities were added on to what I've just described to you I was doing at Wyeth. And after a few years, we had business development activities, as you mentioned earlier, anything from research collaborations, licensing acquisitions, to search and evaluation, to venture activities as part of my team. And we were also running actually our own portfolio of 20 or 25 or so programs at any given time, programs that were actually driven by partnerships with either academic PIs or early biotech, a concept that was called Centers for Therapeutic Innovation that I inherited for the last 7 or 8 years. Actually, one program that you might have heard about more recently was the TL1A. That we were out-licensing to Roivant originally and then got acquired by Roche for, I think it was like 7.1 billion or so late last year. Anyhow, after 15 years, I was starting to think about what is next. And I always thought about retiring out of a position in either leading a small biotech or a VC. So not really out of large pharma, doing large pharma for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. But it's always tough to find the right time point. So as I mentioned, venture activities were part of my responsibilities at Pfizer. And through that, I got to know a number of VC firms over the years. And I had conversations with a few of them and eventually decided to join Canaan earlier this year. And having fun so far, not having looked back, I have to admit. But long-winded story, but basically not always fully planned. But I think being flexible and fortunate that my choices always kept options open, be it in my PhD thesis at the research center in Boston or the postdoc at Harvard or the fairly broad role at Pfizer. All of these really gave me a fairly broad perspective, and with that, the opportunity to move into an even better role. And we'll see what comes next.
Yeah, and then just moving on to Canaan, let's just talk about the investment strategy and the focus areas, but also like what excites you most about Canaan.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, interest in science has been probably the most continuous driver in my whole career, and that has not changed. Actually, a key driver for me to move out of large pharma into the VC world has been the desire to get more back to hands-on science. Now, putting me back on the bench would be a major risk for everyone involved. You don't want that. But assessing a bunch of really cutting edge science with lots of promise and help enable these to bring this forward to patients, I think that's where I see a lot of fun in, and really being close to the science and maybe being able to shape the science. So finding like-minded colleagues was keen for me, and I had the opportunity to get to know Canaan as a firm, as well as some of the colleagues over the past, 7 or 8 years or so in my role at Pfizer already. We actually had a number of co-investments that we did. Arrakis was one of them, small molecule company targeting RNAs, and others. Grey Wolf was another example. So we were quite aligned when it comes to the focus on the science, the type of investments being made, the size of investments being made. And I was looking for a firm that was, well established, had a strong track record, and was well respected in the field, as name recognition is obviously quite critical in this, fairly competitive space. I thought Canaan was a great fit for all of this, and on top, they were fully funded. They just raised over $1 billion over the last year, giving us great ammunition to invest into really exciting science. Besides, having a great time of likewise minded science-focused colleagues, I think it's the opportunity to really be able to follow the most promising science and not be tied into finding the, let's say, relatively best fit in a specific area of science. So, bottom line for this, I think reputation, fund size, track record were really important for my decision, but science focus and having the patient in mind were aspects that really convinced me to join Canaan.
Yeah, I love that. And then, Canaan's obviously known for company creation, big time as well. How do you approach company creation? Is Canaan a little bit different as well into how other companies might do it?
Well, I think it comes back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, what attracted me to Canaan. Part of what Canaan is known for, as you said, is being able to identify great science with breakthrough potential in its very early stages, often still being part of academic research, and taking this early research and translate it into an effective drug development machine. I think is really what makes Canaan maybe not unique, but outstanding. This typically requires for a Canaan partner to take on a quite active role, as you can imagine, an active role in working with founders and other key colleagues to work out the most promising approach of taking what are often just a few early experiments in an academic lab and convert that into a smoothly running biotech machine. That involvement can include anything from designing key experiments to recruiting outstanding talent into key roles or leading the next financing round, all of the above. So Canaan, having done this well over and over again, speaks to the recognition I think you were referring to in your question, and certainly the scientific and the business skills present in the firm. And again, something that really attracted me to them there.
Yeah. And you mentioned how good you are at, spotting, niche technologies or, technologies coming through. What concentrations or specific areas are you most passionate about exploring for the future investments, and why?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few areas where we're seeing great progress in the science and attractive approaches to new medicines. I mean, obviously oncology remains a key area of interest for everyone in the field, with around half the BD deals still falling into that field. And despite the challenge that, with a more detailed molecular understanding of the pathologic processes underlying cancers, it sometimes feels like oncology, originally predicted to only deliver one blockbuster after the other, now feels sometimes more like a rare disease franchise, with patient stratification and segmentation of the market. Nevertheless, I think areas like colorectal cancer, breast, lung cancer, remain largely underserved areas and novel approaches building on the successes we've seen with things like CAR T, ADCs, immuno-oncology kind of combos, show continue to show some promise, but also expanding into new spaces, create some excitement. There's further improvements on the kinase inhibitors, an area we've played in. You see ADCs with novel linker or payload technology, radiopharmaceuticals having a comeback. So there's a number of fairly hot areas right now in that space, and we've certainly invested into them as well. I think more for the mid to long term areas like the dark genome, biomolecular condensates, areas like this hold some promise, for the future. But a lot of AI efforts are also seen in the space, particularly so far, at least for molecular design, be it for small or large molecules or gene editing approaches, but also for patient stratification. And I'm sure at one point, AI, or probably better said, machine learning, will also expand our areas of the biology, underlying these various cancers. Besides oncology, I think there are a number of other areas. We see quite a few exciting, developments in the autoimmune space, be it, GI related, IBS, UC, Crohn's driven. When it comes to mechanisms that are shared by a number of disorders, I think we see particular interest from biotech, from VCs, from pharma. So mechanisms that play into the pathology of several key indications, like immuno-oncology is an obvious example. But we're also seeing some interesting efforts when it comes to fibrosis, for example, another area, be it in cancer, be it in autoimmune disorders like IPF or COPD or cardiovascular disease. So they really play a role across those common pathogenic mechanisms. And I think we see more and more programs targeting that.
Yeah.
Talking actually about cardiovascular disease, we're also seeing some good progress in the understanding of cardiac and renal disorders. And I think we're really looking fairly intensely into that area, investing into that area. And last but not least, as I said earlier, I was thinking neuroscience is too complex to ever be understood. But obviously, neuroscience does hold a lot of promise for the future, from dementia to Alzheimer's disease, mood disorders, and so on. I mean, huge unmet medical needs and early, emerging science renders this probably going to be a main play in BD deals in coming years. My opinion, we better understand the pathological mechanisms. It's still some ways to go, so we have a fairly thoughtful, measured approach into neuroscience, but I'm confident that over the years, this will become a major player in this whole endeavor.
I think it's interesting as well. Like, what I've just taken from your answer there is that you need to be pretty broad and diverse as well in your investments, because at the start you talked about what's hot as well. I think that's always an interesting topic. It's like, how much do you follow the trends in the market, and how much do you take a bit more of a risk and maybe go out on your own on a few things as well?
I think you have to follow the science. This has been a motto for me for a long time. I started out in a fairly narrow field. My first experimental work was counting the number of monocytes that adhere to an endothelial cell layer. So it's a very specific, narrow part of science. And then I extended a little bit more into the broader cardiovascular space. And then I expanded even across therapeutic areas. And I have to say, the advantage of being therapeutic area agnostic and modality agnostic is you can really follow the best science. You don't have to find the best science in a very defined field, which on a relative scale might be good, but on an absolute scale might not compete with other stuff out there. So here, particularly in the VC world, you can really go after whatever you believe is the best science and does provide the best opportunity. And that can come from any of the areas. Each area has their own challenges and advantages, but they all have, I think, valid applications.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And then, one of the first areas you mentioned was oncology. And I don't know if you've seen this recently, but there's been quite a lot of pivots away from oncology. I think mainly probably due to costs and people wanting to extend runway. I don't know if you've seen that or even clocking it when you're
Well,
looking at your own strategies.
I mean, typically things come in waves, right? So also in oncology, we've seen oncology being at the forefront of BD deals for the last 5 maybe years, maybe the decade. And I'm not sure that will change that dramatically overnight. I think what we have seen though is that, for example, areas of immuno-oncology that have been tried really hard in the cancer setting, starting to shift over a little bit to autoimmune diseases, for example, trying to find a different home for a mechanism that could apply to several indications. It comes back to what we talked about earlier. Common mechanisms can be applied across a number of diseases. So I think we see quite a bit of that. On the other hand, we do see a little bit of a recycling of ADCs. We do see a little bit in the radiopharmaceutical space, more activities coming up. I think with also very targeted mechanisms, like in the kinase space, we do see a lot of improvements there. So I do believe that for now and for the next coming years, oncology will remain a very strong player. Now, over the next 5 to 10 years, can cardiovascular or neuroscience become equal or even stronger from a deal flow perspective? Probably, but that still needs to be seen.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then if you look at like the last year or year and a bit, there has obviously been some market turbulence. Has Canaan adapted or shifted, your strategy in any way because of this, or not really?
No, I think we do have some adjustment. Actually, I would say Canaan was very well positioned to address these turbulences. That's probably a better way of putting it. Actually, speaks, I think, to really another strength of Canaan. We just talked a little bit earlier about how well known Canaan is for its company formation model. However, Canaan actually has, for some time now, diversified its investments and has done investments not only into forming newcos or Series A, but also Series B and C, and actually even Series D, which is not always, known about Canaan, unfortunately. Obviously, newco creation, can take quite some time to do both, deliver data and financial returns. Investing into a more advanced opportunity, like our investments to, as I said, Series B, C, or D, when we have Alterome, which was Series B, we have Autobahn Series C, we have Catalem Series D, allows us to balance the longer term perspective of newco formation, with short term returns from later series investments. And right now, we know that pharma is particularly looking for de-risked kind of assets. Ideally some clinical proof of concept or close to. And I think that's where the later stage investments really have been valuable and will be valuable in the next few years to come. What we typically do for the later stage investments, we're keen to see that respective financing round has the potential to deliver key data that bring the company to a key inflection point that could trigger an M&A by pharma or support an IPO. So again, bottom line, I think balancing the investment themes is key to Canaan's success and investor return. And with that, you always are a little bit better prepared when it comes to these up and downs in the markets. You do have some long-term vision that will take 5+ years to yield returns, but can have very high returns because you're in it from the very beginning. Or you can have also more shorter term returns if you look for really promising ideas in the later stages. And I think that's kind of I wouldn't call it an adjustment, but the preparations that Canaan had going into this current time.
No, I think it's really interesting. I'm going to completely change the topic now, to be fair. So,
Sure.
what advice would you give to aspiring scientists and entrepreneurs looking to make their mark in biotech and in VC?
That's a good question. I think it all starts with asking yourself, what do you want out of life and what do you want out of work? And now it sounds like a long journey here, but stick with me. A typical question of mine during interviews over the past years has always been, I give you a blank piece of paper and you can write your own retirement speech. What would it say? What position would you like to retire from? And I think that's kind of actually equally important. I think you have to let people know they have to stay true to themselves. It sometimes you're looking for the answer based on the person who's asking you. That's not the right thing. Answer it, truly for yourself. And I think thinking about this early on can actually be quite helpful in your career planning. For example, I mean, during my time at Pfizer, many said they wanted to be the head of R&D or the CEO of Pfizer, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with it. And obviously no guarantees you ever get to that position, but it tells you early on what you probably should do to keep that option open, even within the next year or 2 or 3. For example, I mean, for myself, instead of moving to the US to do my postdoc, I could have started, in a small biotech firm in Germany. If I would have done that, I probably would have never gotten the offer by actually a German company, among all things, to build a cardiovascular research unit in large pharma. And if I'd stayed focused on cardiovascular, on the other hand, and did not branch out into the broader role at Wyeth and Pfizer, I probably would have never been attractive to VC firms. So bottom line is, I think trying to understand what options do you need to open up to have a chance to get where you want to be is important. You have to be flexible. There's typically more than one way to success, but try to think about where you want to end up. And if it's working in a hospital as a physician, being a venture capitalist, or being the CEO of a biotech or large pharma company, there are certain things you will have to, put under your belt to ever get there. So
Yeah.
I think that's the key piece. Be honest to yourself what you really want out of life, and start thinking about how you could get there. Again, not just one path, but a limited number of options, I think, that can get you there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then finally, this is always a tough one, this Uwe. So finally, if you could have dinner with any scientist or innovator, past or present, who would it be and why?
That's a tough question. I mean, there are lots of names coming to mind. But since I guess the question is fictitious anyhow, I would say I would love to have a dinner party, actually, bringing together some of the greatest minds in science throughout history and hear from them, actually, how over the centuries, they perceived their work at their time, but also for them to hear how they influenced the future of science and mankind, to that matter. I mean, anywhere from, I don't know, Aristotle to Darwin, Galilei, Newton, Curie,
Wow.
Pasteur, Bohr, Tesla, Einstein, Hawking, you name it. I think it would make for probably a long but quite interesting dinner party. And just to be clear, I'm keeping the live ones out in hope that, on the very remote chance, one day I will have a chance to actually meet them in person. But I think it would be a great get together and great insights from some great minds.
Yeah, what a discussion that would be. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be crazy. I think that's a great answer. And look, thanks so much for coming on, Uwe. It's been a pleasure, really interesting. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks, Max.
And thank you very much. And please, everyone, subscribe to the BioHub. And thanks again, Uwe.